They said the war was finally ending, that Japan had been broken, its cities burned, its army starved, and its people left with nothing but ruins and silence. But behind the closed doors of America's top military offices, something darker was already taking shape. A plan for one more strike. A weapon more powerful than anything seen before, already built, assembled, and waiting for a target. The world would later learn the names Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but there was supposed to be a third. The third atomic bomb. Few people realized that by the time Japan was negotiating surrender, the United States had already prepared another bomb, and President Harry S. Truman knew exactly where it might fall if Japan refused to surrender. In the first week of August, 1945, the world changed forever. The first bomb, Little Boy, had been dropped over Hiroshima on August 6th. The second, Fat Man, followed on August 9th over Nagasaki. The devastation was unimaginable. Cities vanished. Tens of thousands died in moments, and tens of thousands more in the weeks that followed. But what most people don't know is that these two bombs were only part of a series, and the third one, already being assembled, was expected to be ready by August 19th, 1945. The plan was straightforward. If Japan didn't surrender, another city would burn. After Nagasaki, military scientists at Los Alamos and the Tinian Island base were already moving quickly. Plutonium cores were in production. The components were ready. The next bomb, identical in design to Fat Man, was waiting for final assembly. It even had a delivery slot, August 19th, penciled into the schedule. At that time, President Truman had been receiving daily updates from his military chiefs. He knew the toll of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He had seen the photographs, the reports, the descriptions of entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. But he also knew that Japan had not yet formally surrendered. And inside the Pentagon, not everyone believed they would. The US. Army Air Forces had already compiled a list of potential target cities that had been deliberately spared from conventional bombing so that the effects of an atomic strike could be clearly measured. On that list were places like Kyoto, Kokura, Niigata, and Yokohama. Kyoto, once the capital of Japan, had been spared not for mercy, but because it was a perfect control target. It was rich in cultural and historical architecture that could show exactly how much an atomic bomb would destroy. But Secretary of War Henry Stimson personally intervened to remove Kyoto from the list, arguing it would cause unnecessary outrage. So the list shrank. Hiroshima was first, Nagasaki second. But Kokura, the city that had narrowly escaped destruction on August 9th, when clouds forced the bomber to divert, was still sitting at the top of the next target list. If Japan hadn't surrendered, Kokura would almost certainly have been the third. By August 10th, American scientists and military planners were already discussing how soon they could have another plutonium bomb ready. The answer came quickly. Just 9 days. The components were en route. The core was being prepared at Los Alamos, and the assembly teams on Tinian Island, where the previous bombs had been loaded, were standing by. The Fat Man type #3, as it was referred to in internal documents, would have been just as deadly as the one dropped over Nagasaki around 20 kilotons of force, capable of obliterating everything within a mile radius and setting fire to the rest. But as this was happening, something unexpected was taking place in Japan. Messages began coming through not from generals, but from diplomats and intermediaries. Japan was ready to talk. They wanted surrender, but with one condition, that Emperor Hirohito be allowed to remain on the throne. Truman was cautious. He didn't trust Japan's government to surrender unconditionally. The memory of Pearl Harbor was still raw. Many US commanders, including General Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, were pressing to continue bombing until Japan formally gave up. They believed it would take several more atomic strikes to force total collapse. In a strange and chilling irony, the third bomb wasn't the end, it was part of a scheduled campaign. The US had planned to produce up to 7 more atomic bombs before the end of 1945. The idea was to drop one every 10 days until Japan surrendered. By mid-August, the war was supposed to be over. But on paper, the gears of destruction were still turning. Meanwhile, the American public was celebrating, newspapers screamed victory after Hiroshima, few people knew there were more bombs being built. They believed America had used its only two superweapons and that Japan's surrender was inevitable. Inside the White House, though, Truman faced the hardest decision of his presidency. He had authorized the first bomb, reluctantly approved the second, and now his generals wanted a third. But this time, something inside him shifted. The reports from Hiroshima and Nagasaki had reached him in full detail. The heat, the radiation, the death toll, they were beyond anything he'd imagined. Truman, by most accounts, was shaken. In a meeting with his cabinet, he reportedly said, "The thought of killing another 100,000 people is too horrible. No more until I say so." He ordered the military to halt all further atomic missions until he gave personal approval. But even then, the weapon wasn't cancelled. It was ready, waiting. Sitting in crates on Tinian, under armed guard, while the world teetered between peace and annihilation. In Japan, cities continued to burn from conventional bombing, communication was fractured, the emperor himself was struggling to convince his generals to accept surrender. Some wanted to keep fighting, to resist invasion even if it meant national suicide. American planes continued to fly reconnaissance missions, and Kokura remained high on the list. If surrender didn't come in days, Truman would have faced the same question again: drop the third bomb or wait? And as the world now knows, Japan did surrender, but just barely and not immediately. The next few days would determine everything: the future of Japan, the legacy of the bomb, and whether history would remember 3 mushroom clouds instead of 2. Because in that narrow window between destruction and peace, the most powerful weapon on Earth was ready, waiting for a single command. And if that command had come, the world's map and its conscience might have looked very different. The clock was ticking. Every day, the components for the third bomb were being assembled. Every hour bringing the world closer to another unimaginable explosion. On Tinian Island, crews worked silently, meticulously, moving crates marked with ominous labels. The work was routine for them, military precision, nothing more. Yet each crate carried the potential to erase a city from the map. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Japan, the atmosphere was heavy with desperation. The emperor's advisors were divided, some demanding continued resistance, others begging for surrender to prevent the annihilation of their people. The cities were already smoking ruins. Civilians, soldiers, and officials alike were struggling to comprehend the scale of destruction. In private, Japanese officials watched newsreels and reports of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in horror, realizing that if the US had more bombs, their entire homeland could vanish within weeks. Back in Washington, Truman was receiving hourly briefings. General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, along with Secretary of War Henry Stimson, provided him updates on the readiness of the third bomb. The reports were chillingly clinical. The plutonium core was complete, the explosives were stockpiled, the B-29 bomber was on standby. Only Truman's approval stood between destruction and delay. What made the third bomb different, however, was not its design, it was the timing. Unlike the first two, which were dropped to shock and force surrender, the third bomb would have served as a psychological hammer, a warning that the atomic age had truly begun. The US had not only proven its technological supremacy, but had demonstrated that it could continue to produce and deliver these weapons with terrifying efficiency. Military planners had already scouted Kokura and Niigata, mapping out flight paths, weather patterns, and strategic impact zones. Kokura, an industrial city with a population of over 400,000, had factories producing war materials, railways connecting it to the rest of Japan, and a dense urban core. It was considered the perfect next target if Japan's surrender was delayed. There is an often overlooked detail that adds another layer of tension to this story. Kokura almost became the target for the second bomb. On August 9th, the bomber carrying Fat Man was supposed to fly over Kokura first, but heavy clouds and smoke obscured the city, forcing the crew to divert to Nagasaki instead. Had the weather been clear, Kokura might have faced annihilation 2 days earlier. The margins of fate were that thin. Historians speculate that the readiness of the third bomb added an unseen pressure on Japan's leaders. Even without the knowledge that another bomb was literally ready to be dropped, the Japanese military understood that surrender was becoming increasingly urgent. They had witnessed unprecedented devastation. They knew there could be more. And yet, the country's surrender was delayed, caught between pride, fear, and the chaotic collapse of command. The story of the third bomb also exposes a side of Truman rarely discussed in public accounts. By August 10th, he understood the gravity of the situation. Unlike many military leaders, he began to reflect not just on the war strategy but on the moral implications of atomic warfare. Reports from Hiroshima and Nagasaki described horrific injuries. Entire families vaporized, buildings flattened, and survivors enduring radiation sickness with no cure. The president grappled with the weight of human life versus the goal of ending the war quickly. It was in this tense moment that a series of urgent communications arrived from Japan. They were desperate to negotiate. Diplomatic envoys, traveling through neutral countries, had sent messages outlining their willingness to surrender, but with one caveat. They wanted the emperor to remain as a symbolic figure. The Japanese people revered him, and even generals who understood the hopelessness of continued war hesitated to act without his sanction. Truman, reading these dispatches, realized the war might end without using the third bomb. But he also understood that military leaders would push for it if he hesitated. The next 9 days would be a delicate balance, waiting, pressuring, and calculating. The world had never been in this situation before, where a single president could decide whether tens of thousands more lives would be extinguished in a single morning. It's also important to consider the broader context of the Manhattan Project and the U.S. industrial capacity at the time. By August 1945, America had not only built 3 bombs, but was poised to manufacture 7 more within months. Each bomb required enormous resources: uranium or plutonium, precision engineering, skilled labor, and the secrecy of an entire military-industrial complex. In the eyes of scientists and generals, the bombs were not just tools. They were statements of technological dominance, symbols of the new world order being born out of fire and ash. Yet behind all the technical brilliance was a profound human cost. The operators, the assembly teams, the B-29 crews they carried out their duties with precision, often unaware of the moral weight of their actions. They were soldiers, technicians, and engineers caught in the war unlike any other, performing calculations that could erase lives in minutes. One detail that has fascinated historians is the meticulous timing of these operations. If Japan hadn't surrendered, the third bomb would have been ready for deployment precisely on August 19th. The crews had already simulated drop missions. They had checked weather patterns. They had rehearsed loading procedures. In every sense, the third bomb was as prepared as Hiroshima or Nagasaki had been, perhaps even more, because its mission was to reinforce the terror, to ensure surrender without hesitation. And yet, all this preparation sat unused. While the US had the power to strike again, Truman weighed the human cost. The atomic age had begun, but the decision to unleash it repeatedly rested entirely on human judgment, not technology. Another often overlooked fact is that the sheer speed of the U.S. atomic program created a new kind of tension in international relations. The Soviets, watching from afar, were eager to know how powerful the United States had become. The readiness of a third bomb, if used, would not just end the war in Japan, it would also send a clear, chilling message to the world about America's new power. This added another layer to Truman's dilemma. Every hour that passed without Japanese surrender allowed time for diplomacy, but also allowed international perceptions to shift. Was the US too eager to destroy? Or was the show of force necessary to save lives in the long run by preventing a protracted invasion of Japan? For Truman, the answer lay somewhere in between. He wanted the war to end, yes, but he also felt the moral weight of what the bombs had wrought. He saw the human suffering in every report, in every photograph, in every survivor's story. And while the third bomb sat ready, waiting in its crates, he began to make a decision that would change history. He ordered the military to prepare for a pause, a critical pause. The next bomb would not be dropped automatically. It would not be delivered unless Japan refused the terms of surrender. And Japan, finally, began to act. The Japanese envoys sent more urgent messages. The emperor's voice began to be heard among generals. Surrender was finally becoming unavoidable. The third bomb, already assembled, might never need to fly. And so, the stage was set for the final hours, a delicate dance of diplomacy, fear, and human decision-making. The world teetered between annihilation and peace. And the third atomic bomb, poised to descend on Kokura or Niigata, waited silently, like a shadow over the Pacific. The decisions made in those days would shape not only the end of World War II, but also the moral and strategic course of the atomic age itself. Every second mattered. Every decision carried consequences for millions of lives, and the world held its breath. The morning of August 14th, 1945, arrived with a tense stillness that seemed to grip the entire world. Across the Pacific, in Japan, the emperor was wrestling with the nation on the brink of total collapse. Cities were devastated, the population exhausted, and the will to fight nearly broken. But pride, tradition, and the stubbornness of military officers threatened to drag the country into a final, catastrophic stand. Across the ocean, on Tinian Island, the third bomb sat quietly in its crates. The planes were ready, the crews were ready, the plutonium core was secure. The weapons were prepared with the same precision and care that had delivered Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yet something had changed. The command from Washington had not come. Truman had paused. He was weighing diplomacy against destruction, morality against military strategy. That pause, brief though it was, became decisive. Japan, sensing the full weight of their predicament, sent envoys to negotiate surrender terms. They were clear. The emperor must be preserved. The Allies, particularly Truman, recognized the significance. They also understood that continued bombing or invasion would likely cost hundreds of thousands of lives, both Japanese and Allied. In the early hours, as diplomats worked feverishly, Truman consulted with his top generals and advisors. Some urged immediate action, drop the third bomb, end the war decisively. Others warned of international backlash, moral consequences, and the burden on America's conscience. The president weighed each argument, each report from the bombings, each photograph of suffering, each survivor's testimony. Finally, the decision was made. No order was given to deploy the third bomb. Japan's surrender would be accepted. The war would end without further atomic devastation. On August 15th, Hirohito addressed his nation over the radio. For the first time, the people heard their emperor speak of surrender. His voice, solemn and frail, carried the weight of a nation crushed by fire and fear. He spoke of peace, of ending suffering, and of moving forward. Millions listened, many weeping, many silent, all aware that the world had been forever changed. The United States, meanwhile, began the process of transitioning from total war to occupation and reconstruction. The third bomb, once a symbol of imminent threat, became a reminder of restraint, of a decision that could have reshaped history in unimaginable ways. Historians often ask the same haunting question: what would have happened if Truman had ordered its use? Kokura or Niigata, cities spared by circumstance and diplomacy, could have been leveled. Tens of thousands more lives could have been lost. The psychological shock to the Japanese people, the destruction of culture, and the acceleration of post-war fear around nuclear weapons might have rewritten the global order entirely. It's a question that lingers because the third bomb was not hypothetical. It was real, ready to go, fully functional. The US had invested immense resources, genius, and labor into creating it. It was a weapon waiting for a single decision. And that decision, for the first and only time in history, was one of restraint rather than action. The aftermath of these events left scars that would last generations. Survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki spoke of shadows burned into walls, of families gone, of lives altered forever. The world realized almost instantly that humanity had entered a new age. An age where a single bomb could wipe out an entire city and where a single decision could decide the fate of millions. Yet, for all the horror, there was also a narrow escape. The third bomb and all those that might have followed were never deployed. The emperor's surrender preserved countless lives. The decisions made in those tense days prevented further nuclear catastrophe. And in that pause, between destruction and mercy, history found a fragile moment of humanity. In the years that followed, the story of the third bomb remained largely hidden, buried in classified documents and military archives. It was a weapon poised over a world already trembling, a reminder of how close humanity came to an even greater disaster. Scholars, journalists, and historians have pieced together the evidence, revealing just how delicate the balance was in those days of August 1945. The implications of this moment are profound. Truman's decision, for all its controversy, was pivotal. It ended the war without further atomic devastation, yet also signaled the dawn of the nuclear age. The world would never be the same. Countries rushed to develop their own nuclear programs. The Cold War would follow, with its constant tension and threat of annihilation. The moral and political dilemmas of nuclear warfare, first confronted in those fateful days, continue to haunt leaders even now. And so, the third bomb serves as a chilling reminder. It was built, assembled, and waiting. The world could have seen a third mushroom cloud, a third city erased, before August even ended. But in a fleeting, critical decision, humanity stepped back from the brink. The war ended. Japan surrendered. Millions of lives were spared. Yet the question remains, how much longer could the world avoid using such power? How close had humanity come to repeating unimaginable devastation? History teaches us that the third bomb was not just a weapon, it was a warning, a test of restraint, and a measure of the moral courage required to hold back forces capable of ending civilization as we know it. Even now, when we study Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when we examine the top secret documents and the careful calculations of the Manhattan Project, we must remember the third bomb. It is a silent testament to how close we came to a world scarred beyond recovery, and to the weight of the choices made in moments of unprecedented power. The atomic age had begun. The war was over. The third bomb never fell. And for that, history and humanity were granted a narrow reprieve.